All right, well, let's go ahead and get started, and we'll still continue to allow people to join us as they can. Welcome, everyone. We are thrilled to have you with us today. Excelsior University's leadership, the Center for Social Justice, and the Race and Ethnicity and the Civic Engagement ROPE teams welcome you to Excelsior's celebration of this year's Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Day. For those of you who are not acquainted with Excelsior's ROPE teams, we have developed 20 communities we call ROPE teams, which we describe as representation and support villages around our students based on what matters to them. Half of them are focused on industries of interest to our students, and half of them on dimensions of identity that matter to our students. If you want to learn more about our ROPE teams or how to engage in them, you can visit them at communities.excelsior.edu, or you can contact the Center for Social Justice or the Career Readiness Center for more information. We have a very special guest with us today, Dr. David Washington, a veteran of the U.S. Army, an organizational behavior consultant, an Amazon best-selling author, and an Excelsior University alumnus, class of 2001. Thank you for visiting us this afternoon or this evening, Dr. Washington. We are honored to have you. But before we introduce you formally, I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. David Scable, president of Excelsior University, who has kindly offered to be here with us to say a few words about Martin Luther King Day. David.
Thank you, Daniel. Martin Luther King Jr. was a civil rights activist who advocated for nonviolent methods to achieve social change and civil rights in the U.S. for African Americans, famously using nonviolent resistance and civil disobedience. King sought equality and justice, and his speeches and leadership helped shape the way for the civil rights movement. At his renowned I Have a Dream speech during the March on Washington in 1963, about 250,000 people gathered in front of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington to demand the end of segregation, as well as fair wages, economic justice, voting rights, education, and civil rights protections for all people. During his speech, King talked about his dream of a country without racism. King received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964 and the Presidential Medal of Freedom posthumously in 1977. In the U.S., his birthday is now the Martin Luther King Day federal holiday, which celebrates King's life and legacy and is observed with rallies, marches, and speeches by civil rights leaders. As part of Martin Luther King Day, we're all encouraged to reflect on the principles of racial equality and nonviolent social change espoused by Dr. King. The 2025 theme for Martin Luther King Day is Mission Possible, protecting freedom, justice, and democracy in the spirit of Nonviolence 365. According to the King Center, this theme should serve as the compass for all the work we need to do this upcoming calendar year and beyond. The pioneering work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. demonstrated that Kingian nonviolence is also known as Nonviolence 365, is a sustainable solution to injustice and violence in our world, ultimately leading to the creation of what King referred to as the beloved community, a society where injustice ceases and love prevails. Welcome, Dr. Washington. We are delighted to have you. Daniel, back to you.
Thank you, David. Before we pass the microphone to Dr. Washington, I want to thank a number of people and units that made today's event possible, starting with Maria and Naila, who's here with us, from marketing, Erin, Jason, and Connor from communications, Jamie, Mackenzie, and Ellen from development, our president, David, Jill and Lori from the president's office, and of course, Pam from the Center for Social Justice. Thank you so much for your amazing partnership and support. And now I have the privilege of introducing Dr. David Washington. Dr. David Washington is a veteran from the U.S. Army, an organizational behavior consultant, an Amazon best-selling author, and an Excelsior University alumnus, class of 2001. His accolades include winning the International Book Awards, New York Book Festival, Los Angeles Book Festival, and San Francisco Book Festival. And earlier this month, Dr. Washington was nominated for the NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Literature. We're really excited, though. Dr. Washington is a former faculty member and assistant dean at North Carolina State University, where he received the Outstanding Teacher and the SGA Distinguished Professor Award. He holds an MBA from Webster University, an MSA from Central Michigan University, and a PhD from the North Carolina State University. He's also a licensed attorney with a law degree from California Southern University. Driven by passion for representation and inspired by his desire to provide his children with heroes in whom they could see themselves, Dr. Washington ventured into the world of graphic novels by his publication, Black Defender: The Awakening, to address the glaring lack of diverse superheroes. And we're very excited to share that everyone here today, for your participation, that we have a copy of Dr. Washington's graphic novel available for everyone who's here tonight. So if you're local, please stop by Excelsior's main lobby to pick up your copy. They're already there. If you are not in the capital region, please email Excelsior Center for Social Justice at excelsior.edu to request your copy and provide us with your email address so that the Center for Social Justice may send you a copy. We'll send everyone who participated tonight an email following up to remind you about this. So Dr. Washington will present today on protecting social justice with the use of graphic novels, a case study of Black Defender: The Awakening. Welcome, Dr. Washington. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Aguilar. I appreciate you so much. And I want to just take a quick moment before I get started into this presentation and just thank Excelsior University. Folks, the faculty, staff, the administration of Excelsior University, you make it possible for many of us who are trying to get our education to achieve this outcome and goal. It is, when I was a soldier in the United States Army, it was Excelsior that allowed me the opportunity to be able to complete my bachelor's degree and leaving as I was leaving my military engagement and going back into the civilian world. And it was a difference maker for me. It made it possible for me to get into my graduate education. It made it possible for me to go on and become a member of a faculty. It made it possible for me to go on to law school, to get my PhD. All of this started with Excelsior University. So to that, I want to just tell you all, thank you so much for what you do for us as we serve. All right, ladies and gentlemen, look, so I've got a few moments to be here with you. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through a presentation really quickly and kind of talk to you about some of the things around the idea of graphic novel and narrative and how it can influence and how it can actually help to change and protect for the concept of social justice. So I'm going to go ahead and flip over to this presentation real quickly. Everything should be good to go. Let's see here. Wow, everything's working. Wonderful. We're off to a great start. Okay, so again, my name is Dr. David Washington. I will be talking to you about the concept of using narrative and the idea of storytelling to protect for social justice. We're here to celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King's legacy and the things in which he brought forward for the concept of civil rights and how that came into play. So I want to start with a quote from Dr. King that helps to kind of frame our dialogue about what we'll be talking about this evening and as we move forward here. Dr. King one time said that our lives begin to end the day that we become silent about the things that matter. And so one of the things for me that is very clear about this statement is that the fact of the matter is there are narratives, stories, and dialogue that needs to be shared in order for us to continue to move forward as a people. And a lot of times, narrative and dialogue influence the concept of justice. It influences the concept of engagement in our society. And if we sit silent and don't speak about those issues at hand, what ends up happening is we lose a little bit of ourselves in this process. We die a little bit every day. This is why it's important for us, if we want to maintain justice, if we want to maintain equity, if we want to get to the positions that King was speaking about in his How I Have a Dream speech, we have to speak about those things that sometimes can be uncomfortable. We have to talk about those things that sometimes can be the things that are not pretty, but are the things that actually matter. And that's why we've got to take the time to engage in narrative and bring narrative forward to maintain social justice. They go hand in hand. The impact of narrative on social engagement and growth is direct because narrative can actually open up the dialogue for things to grow and go in a better direction, or it can close the dialogue and completely shut things out. So this evening, I want to take you through a few case studies around the concept of how narrative has this effect, and then I'll talk to you about how I actually use narrative to engage the concept of social justice and put those things in place. Okay, so a little bit of a history lesson here, folks. So art can influence our society. This is something that's common and that's something that's very clearly denoted. But I want to take you to two case studies that kind of show and kind of put this on display for us. The first case study, 1915's Birth of a Nation. This is W.D. Griffin's work that was brought and adapted from a book called The Klansman. Essentially, what ended up happening in 1915, a silent movie was produced that essentially was set in the Reconstructed South. And right after the post-Civil War, right after the Civil War, that post-Reconstruction period that was happening within the South. And the premise around the story was, what was it like to be a Southerner at that time in that environment, having to deal with the Northern occupation after the Civil War was over? In the course of the story, it outlines that Southern whites are being oppressed by their Northern overseers, and that people, the formerly enslaved, are running a vicious muck through the South. In fact, the narrative went on to describe particularly men of color, Black men, as feral beasts that needed to be contained and needed to be managed and needed to be dealt with. And so the hero of the story, the hero that comes forward in this narrative, that brings this about, that protects the Southern whites that are trying to continue to live their life, is the Ku Klux Klan. This is the basis of this entire narrative. Based off of the name, Klansman, you probably guessed that the Klan is a central figure in this story. This story went on to be promulgated throughout the United States. And in fact, it got the #1 spot throughout all of 1915. This film was brought forward as the idea of, hey, here's what it's like to be if you were in the Reconstructed South after the Civil War. This is what it was like. And this was completely false. This was completely wrong. What ended up happening with D.W. Griffin's Birth of a Nation is it took a narrative that was a narrative of saying, hey, the formerly enslaved, the people of color are the danger to the white community. And because of this, these individuals need to be controlled. And with this film went on to help breed back and bring back the Ku Klux Klan in some degree. Some historians have even said that this film single-handedly brought the Klan back into motion. It resurrected it and brought it back to life. Well, I'm not going to go that deep with it, but I will say this part. It definitely made for a good recruiting video. This film actually put into place a lot of the things and spoke to a lot of the fears that some people were having in America at the time. And unfortunately, some Americans bit down on that and wholeheartedly believed what was being shown in this film as history. And this is where I go to the issue about this is why narrative is important. Sometimes narrative that is displayed in our popular media can influence us in a negative way to believe things that are just simply not true. Things that, quite frankly, don't have any relationship to reality. And the idea of Birth of a Nation, the Black people that were there in this film, by the way, actors that were playing in this film to get Black were using Black face for this. No African Americans were engaged in that process. The actors that wore the blackface were the actors that were the feral beasts that were essentially assaulting Caucasian women that were there within the cities and towns of those places. But again, this was not the reality of the day at the time, right? And so what ended up happening, that narrative went on and it went and poured through the nation. And the Klan did see an uptick We see an uptick in the Klan and its roles and its rosters through this film. Again, some historians say single-handedly brought it back, but I think that's a bit generous. I would say definitely it did add to the process, and even more so, it also added to the American psyche. This film actually went on to be aired in the White House. It was screened in the White House in the Woodrow Wilson administration. There's a bit of contention among historians about, oh, hey, what did Woodrow Wilson exactly say about this film? Some people say that Woodrow Wilson endorsed the film as being historically accurate. Some people say that his words were taken out of context. I'm an attorney, so I'm going to go with what we can prove. So here's what we've got. This film was so widespread and popular that it earned a spot in the White House viewing selection. If you go to IMDb Pro and you go back into January 1st of 1915 all the way to December 31st of 1915, you will find over 1,600 entries of films that were created during this exact same time. But this film, completely historically inaccurate and blatantly racist, got the number one spot. The power of narrative. That is why, again, we need to have narratives that look to everyone and includes everyone in the dialogue. If we have a narrative that's only one-sided, what ends up happening is that one-sided narrative, in some cases, becomes the truth to the common person. Because of what we consume, that informs our position, that informs our perspective. And if we consume information that is not completely accurate or doesn't give a full telling of the stories that are in place, what ends up happening, unfortunately, is that becomes the call of the day. But let's do another case study. Let's go a century forward. We have 2019, we have something called American Skin, another film that goes into this issue. So American Skin was produced by Nate Parker, and Nate Parker is the gentleman that you see on the cover of the movie. And what ended up happening here in this narrative, it was a reflective narrative that looked back and said, hey, what's going on in America right now? In the story, not to spoil it for you, but there are a few spoilers here, so sorry, gang, but here's where we got to go with it. As Nate is going through, his son, they are one day stopped in a police interaction. And unfortunately, his son makes a faulty move with a cell phone and is shot and killed. Nate Parker's character goes on as a former military member and goes and seizes the police station where the officer works with him and a few of his friends. In the process of it, they hold a mock trial to determine the liability of the officer in question or his guilt. And by the end of it, they get to the conclusion where the officer is guilty. And instead of exacting the revenge of killing the officer, he lets the officer feel what it was like to lose someone close to him through a series of engagements at the end. You can probably guess Nate's character does not make it out of the story alive. But the idea about it in this narrative, it took the time to examine what it was like to be Black in America and to face some of the issues that are in place. Narrative is a powerful tool because it can allow for, when done properly, an opportunity to see a window into a world that we may not be familiar with. This is why I advocate for the idea that we should definitely and most definitely engage the process of getting a complete narrative of America. Because in some cases, when we're going through and we're producing the narratives, concepts, ideas, those are incomplete. It is the situation of the hunter and the lion. The hunter is the one who ends up writing the history, not the lion, right? So what ends up happening is we don't get a full retelling of that. And so the danger in this is sometimes that the fact of the matter of not having a complete narrative opens up issues of misunderstanding. It allows for, in some cases, ignorance and racism and a whole host of other things to continue to breed and live on. That's why it's so important with narrative. So one of the things that kind of pushed me into this book environment is I started saying to myself, we've got to start looking at narrative, and we've got to look at narrative as a tool to engage the process to find better ways to help society move forward and to get into those dialogues that are there. Sometimes what we're kind of missing in our current environment is that we are trying to shut down or close down debate and discussion, dialogue, because some people are like, I'm not comfortable with that. That's not what I want to talk about. But the thing of it is that comfort has to kind of go to the sideline if we want progress. If we are not interested in hearing what another person's experience is about and what they're going through, we're a bit blindsided to their reality of the world. If you take the two films between the idea of Birth of a Nation and you take American Skin and you put them together, you're looking at there are two different views of what's happening in America in two different times and the way in which it's being seen. The danger to social justice today, in my humble opinion, is the idea that we are now cracking down on the idea of discussion and dialogue. Book bannings. Book bannings, quite frankly, in the banning of material, social material of engagement, readings, writings, and things of this nature, is opening up the window for the tearing down of social justice, but not only social justice, but democracy itself. Book bannings introduce an opportunity for those who want one particular narrative to exist while the others are forgotten to move forward with those things. That's not the experience I want to be reflected in history. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shut down all other narratives that do not align with that, even though I personally do not know what those narratives are. This is dangerous to democracy and it hurts everyone in this process. But the thing that's even more dangerous with this is the editing of history to get a particular outcome. So for example, when we edit history and we edit story and narrative to fit an outcome, this invites even more problems. And again, it makes it even harder for us to get to the position of what King was talking about. In fact, for example, here in my home state of North Carolina, in Wilmington, North Carolina, in November the 10th, 1898, there was the Wilmington riots, right? This was a coup that actually happened in America, where a freely and fairly elected Black leadership, civic leadership, was put into place and was forcibly removed from office by those who didn't want to have Black leadership of the city and towns that they were in. And because of this, this portion happened, but what ended up happening was people started to edit and editorialize history. In fact, in the city of Wilmington at one time, librarians were given a strict rule that anyone asking about this event, anyone trying to get information about this event, it should not be shared and it should not be given to them. It is only until recent times where people have now been able to get into the information and see those things that are happening. But folks, here's the big problem with this. We have had a coup on the American soil. We have had a coup in our own homeland, and it is something that is not widely known or taught in American history. This is the danger of editorializing history and narrative. That's why we've got to take the time to say, hey, the art that we produce, the stories that we produce, the things we bring to the market, those things have got to actually have a full and complete position for a lot of all of America. Because again, we cannot just silo it to just one particular view. This is dangerous to our social position, social justice, but it is incredibly dangerous to our democracy. When we editorialize history and our engagements and our narratives, it tears down the very fabric of what we have here in America. When we shut down the concept of dialogue and the disagreement to work through, when we have the chilling effect around communications, when we limit the First Amendment in its engagement and the ability for people to speak their truth, to speak their situation, we invite tyranny. We're inviting it. We're giving it a place to stay. Because what's happening now is we're saying, hey, it's okay to go ahead and pull someone else's narrative out of the way because I just don't like that narrative, or it's just not something I want to hear about. It's okay to go ahead and limit their rights and then let this narrative go forward that might not even be factually correct. So art does have an effect on society, and we have to be mindful and conscious of that as creators. And we have to make sure that everyone is brought to the table so they can have their dialogue and engagement with it. That takes me to this. So what's the deal with this Black Defender thing, Dave? Well, let me tell you about it. So here's the thing. I got into this for a very important reason. My children brought me into this. As a father of three, on Fridays, we have something called Family Friday Night. And what we do on family night is we sit around and we watch action films and we watch action series and we do all this great stuff. We have been doing this for a number of years. But as a parent, when I would look up at the screen, a lot of times I would not see reflections that my children could identify with. And eventually, after a period of time, I started getting really concerned about this because as we went on from series to series, movie to movie, there was just not a lot of representation that was there. And so I said, you know what? I think I can fix this. I think I can do something about this. So I decided, I said, hey, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to write a graphic novel. W.D. Griffin's movie, The Birth of a Nation, was based upon a book called The Klansman. And the reason why I decided to start with a novel, a graphic novel, was to start with the concept of general accessibility. Start with that first, and then it will grow into something else. And so what I ended up doing, I said, hey, for accessibility purposes, let's take this graphic novel and let's put these things in place. Let's go ahead and talk about these issues, and let's give representation to those that are not represented fully within the narratives that we have in place. So I went forward and worked on that. Now, here's the thing, gang. I've got to be completely honest with you on this. I had never read a graphic novel prior to me writing this. I was not a frequenter of the comic environment, but for my children, I delved in and I said, you know what? I think I can learn how to do this. And literally, I picked up a bunch of graphic novels. I started reading through them. I started taking note about how the rhythm and flow went about it. And then I started to write Black Defender. And that's what kind of got me on this trail. I had two pieces I wanted to do in this work. The first thing was I wanted to make sure to get that representation in place. Representation is so very important. The representation, when a person can see themselves in the reflection of their heroes, their media, the things that are around them, it gives them a positive association with self. Again, a small history lesson. Brown versus Board of Education was a critical move forward as far as the integration of schools and moving things in the right direction to help get more equality in America. But one of the things that was brought up in there was the Clark study. Most of you may be familiar with this. This is where they talk about they took a group of Black children, they sat them down, they showed them two dolls. One doll was a white doll, one doll was a Black doll, and they asked them which doll is the good doll. And a majority of the children that were brought before the Clarks, it was a husband-wife team that was running the research, said the white doll is the better doll. Because that was the effect of segregation. Because of the fact that they could not see full representation of themselves in the people that they, in their leadership, in the individuals in their communities that were, again, would be in power and do those things. The idea was that because we have been segregated or put off to the side, we must be less than, and we must not be where we need to be. So for me, one of the things I understand the impact of representation. So what I ended up doing was I said, we will fix this problem. We will take this step. It will be difficult, but we're going to do it anyway. The other thing I wanted to get to is I wanted to talk about social issues within the work. I wanted to be able to engage with people and talk with them about, hey, let's talk about some of these issues that sometimes can be a little bit difficult to engage with. And let's start that dialogue and kind of work those things there. Another thing that I ended up engaging with them about was a narrative of heroes. The thing about a narrative is that that narrative can give strength to a position, a belief, a concept, or a general movement forward. In religion, in many cases, you'll find that there are tons of stories that have been put together that that have been retold from generation to generation to generation to strengthen the concept of faith, to strengthen the concept of belief, to allow for those things to be put into place. Narrative is a powerful thing. But one of the things I saw in many cases when I would go out to the marketplace was the narrative of heroism when it came to Black or brown life was just not as strong as majority life. So what I wanted to do was, if you want people to be heroic, you've got to give them heroes, right? And this is where I kind of take a little bit of a depart from the standard quo of the presentation. I just kind of want to talk to you for a second. So here's the thing, folks, we need heroic people now more than ever, right? We need heroic people that can step forward and say, this is wrong. This is not the way we should go about this. We need to protect those that are weaker than us. We need heroic people. I'm not talking about put on a cape and go fight crime. That's not what Dr. Washington's speaking about. I'm not talking about you putting on a bulletproof vest and going out there and being a vigilante. I'm talking about the heroism that it takes to help get things right socially for everyone. We need more heroic people. And when people can see themselves in heroic stories and narrative, it encourages them to be heroic in real life. I remember when I was a soldier, we used to tell the story of Michael York. For those of you who are in the military, you probably remember the story about the pacifist Michael York, who in World War II did phenomenal, fantastic things for the protection of his battalion and the wonderful things that he ended up doing, right? We tell those stories because those stories give to show as examples of, hey, this is what you can do. This is what you can be. This is what you can achieve, right? Narrative encapsulates a lot of those things. And that's why I am so very strong on this position, because I know the power of narrative. A story that shows and puts that person that looks like you, that goes through your struggles in that same position, and then shows how that person goes through the process and then comes out the other side. That little bit of narrative can allow a person to go forward and do outstanding things. But if we don't have those narratives there, we're asking the person to come up with it out of raw cloth. We're asking them to just, hey, work it forward and hopefully it'll come about. And that's not really what we want to do. If we want a society that's built like that, if we want a society that's built that we have heroic people that step up, take charge, speak truth to power, speak up when the things are wrong, we've got to develop a narrative around that. And that narrative must be consistent for everyone that's there. People deserve to see themselves in their heroes. And so for me as a father, that was my mission. I took that mission on full engagement. I'm going to do this. And so that's why I ended up going down this path with the graphic novel, because I believe that, particularly by putting it in graphic form versus than just writing a story where people could look at the characters and see, wow, that person looks like me. One of the nicest things that's kind of come out of this is when I see children that have read my book, or I have people that have read my book that are from my community that look at that, the book looks like them, and the responses that I get in that process. Like, I felt seen. I felt real. I felt that the person who was writing this spoke to the situation that I am going through. This felt real for me. It's one of the great, I've had some great commentary that has been given about this book. But when I talk to readers or fans or people who've actually gone through and read the book, and they tell me it feels so real and it felt so real for me, it warms my heart as an author, because I know I've done my job. I've done what I was supposed to do. And that allows for the continuation, the protection of that social justice I keep talking to you about. The narrative influences that process, and that keeps those things in place. So with that being said, that's why I kind of chose this path and kind of went this way with it. But let's talk about narrative as a tool. I've kind of gotten to this a few times, but I want to kind of get to it now in a little deeper perspective. So narrative. Narrative actually is a tool for social justice. Folks, this is the panel, one of the panels from inside of the book that hopefully, if you're in the city, you can go ahead and pick it up, or you can send your email and then you'll get it mailed out to you. This is one of the opening panels where we open a discussion about privilege. And in the book, one of the things I ended up doing was, in the midst of all the action and the heroism and the good things that are happening there, which is great and awesome for those who just enjoy the entertainment factor of the book, I started to give like those subtle notes to talk about the things that engage our society that we can have an effect on, and things that we can make change for, right? And one of the key things I ended up going was the idea about societal privilege. Peggy McIntosh was the original researcher who coined the term white privilege. And I believe Dr. McIntosh has been terribly misquoted in our current environment. There have been things where people have weaponized this word. They've taken the word privilege and they have weaponized it and turned it into something where people can't even admit it exists. And in some of my work as a consultant, one of the things I'm called in to do is I'm called in to do diversity, equity, and inclusion work sometimes. And one of the things that I have to go through, one of the toughest points of contention I have to kind of deal with in doing that work, is the existence of privilege and talking about that, right? And so most of the time, I kind of hit it in like a three-part process. I go through history, that's coming from the National Archives. Not a lot of debate there. If they're wrong, I'm wrong. We're all wrong. The law, not a lot of debate there either. This is all written down. We have that in place. Privilege, that becomes a big one, because a lot of times what ends up happening is when people get to that word, because of some of the weaponization that has occurred around the word, people just don't want to accept its existence. They say, oh, this is not real. This cannot be real. This thing does not happen. This is not a situation. And so what I ended up doing in the book, something that I did with my clients, I actually explained privilege in a way that allowed for people to be able to get in on the message and see how this actually affects individuals. So folks, I'm gonna turn this into a quick little diversity class and kind of walk you through how we walk through the concept of privilege. Get in your mind right now every negative connotation that you can think about with the word associated with the word privilege. Just take a second for me. Just think about it. All right, you got your word? Okay, good. Now here's what we're going to do. I'm going to go through a list of a couple of these words I've heard over the years of what people say about privilege. Unearned, undeserving, spoiled, brat, inconsistent, rich, undeserving, right? These are some of the negative things that go along with the concept of privilege. These are some of the negative things that we have associated with this word. Now, put white in front of that, male in front of that, able-bodied, or whatever other majority positions you want. This is why generally people don't like to engage the concept of privilege. So in talking about the concept of privilege, we have to take a moment and step back. Privilege is no different than process. Here's an example. So folks, I conducted a pilot study one time examining what was it like for African American female entrepreneurs and what were their experience when they came to their mentoring situation. I just simply, nice little easy pilot study, got a few women together, started working the pilot study. Thing I asked them, say, hey ladies, so I had a part of my protocol. Hey, ladies, real quick, how did your cross gender, where you had a male mentor, how did that relationship start for you? And a lot of the ladies in the study said the same thing, which was, I first had to determine why was he there? Why was he there? Now, folks, I've been mentored by many people, men, women, black, white, a whole bunch of different things. And then it hit me like a bag of bricks. That's privilege. That's privilege. I, Dr. David Washington, I am privileged. What? Let me help you with it. So, in all of my engagements, of all of my mentoring relationships, I have never wondered to myself, let's play never have I ever, not never have I ever wondered to myself the following things. Is this female mentor here to help me progress in my career, or does she want this mountain of milk chocolate? What is it like? What do you want? Why are you here? I've never had to think that to myself, not one time. I've never had to think, oh my gosh, is she trying to make sexual advances toward me? I've never had to consider that, right? And in that, I'm privileged. When it came to that part of my process, I didn't have to give any psychic energy to that concern. And because I didn't have to give any psychic energy to that concern, guess what? I'm privileged because in that was something I never had to worry about. Another thing I never had to worry about when I met my mentors. I never had to think about, oh my gosh, I can't go to dinner with these people. It might send the wrong idea. I never had to think about, oh, I got to park. If I do go to meet my mentors, I got to park really close to the building so I can make sure I can get my keys and not be assaulted getting back to my car. Never thought about those things. And so for that, in that, I am privileged. And that's why I say, how you became you, I became me, is a process. And sometimes, unfortunately, that process might be influenced by immutable characteristics such as race, gender, national origin, sexual orientation, disability, status, or religion, right? And that's where the idea about privilege comes into play. Having that dialogue in a graphic novel, where again, you can take some of the venom out of the word, where people can just read the words and kind of figure it out for themselves, it has an impact. One of the nicest compliments I got about that concept was from a white administrator in a western part of the country. And he said, you know, that is the best definition of privilege I have heard as a white man ever. And it made it easy for me to understand what the fuss is about. One time I was actually working with the Marines, and one time a Marine Corps colonel, when I was working with his unit, came back and he said, "Hey, Dr. Washington, right now as a white male, I now understand where this privilege thing is going, and I see what's going on. It's been explained in a way that allows me to get into the message." And that's one of the things I wanted to do in the book. I went through the book and I started saying, you know, I can protect social justice. I can engage social justice and do it in a way that allows the reader to just walk through the material without all the extra and then just give them those dialogues and talk to them. Another thing I moved on to was a concept about media representation when Black and brown life is lost. That sometimes, unfortunately, when Black and brown life is lost, sometimes that media representation is not reflective of the whole person's life. It's the hit reel of the worst parts of that person's life, or the things that would the kind of bleed and lead position about a story, the things that are sensationalized that don't really get to the core person that's at place. I talk about the idea about policing in America and going through the idea of, hey, you know, we hold a lot of people accountable in our society, and we should, right? So why shouldn't we hold people that have the power of life and death on their hip responsible for the things that they do in the service of those engagements? The idea behind this is that at each one of those points, when we have those discussions, those dialogues, slowly I'm allowing for the message to move forward and for people to at least examine it in a way where it's not toxic to them and it allows them to say, okay, what is he talking about? One of the nice things about it is when you go through that type of engagement, I found that graphic novels were far easier to get that message across than a standard kind of textbook novel engagement. It gives a chance for the imagination to work and it gives a chance for you to examine it without prying eyes looking forward. So that's why I stress narrative is a great tool for social justice because narrative can get those things that sometimes it might be difficult to have in a conversation out on the table. You ever watched a really good film and then you started a dialogue about it with your friends? You ever read a really good book and then you ended up saying, hey, let's go talk about this? You read something or you saw something on the social media that just kind of caught your attention and then you went on and on about it with your friends? That's the power of narrative. And that's one of the things that we can tap into to maintain and to, in fact, preserve and maintain and advance social justice. All right. So with that, folks, where do we go from here? What do we do with this knowledge, this information, these conversations that we're having around this concept of, hey, what comes into narrative? By the way, where do we go from here is actually the title of the last book that Martin Luther King actually wrote. The full title was Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? And the idea was the king had went over to Jamaica to essentially get away from the world for a moment and just write this manuscript about, okay, we've really made some real big gains in the civil rights movement, and we've really done some really big things in what we have done. But now, where do we go from here? He was thinking about the concept about economic justice. What can we do to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to engage in society and profit from their engagement in society? He started wondering about the war. He started wondering about the things that were at place. He started writing about things that started to go outside the sphere of just merely civil rights, but about the society as a whole. And one of the things that we look at when we're trying to think about, hey, where do we go from here? Where do we go from these moments in time? Folks, this is one of the things I kind of have a simple position on this one. This is my humble opinion. We have two positions, support and do, right? Support those that give the narratives and bring those narratives forward, that tell a full and complete picture of what society and what our lives actually look, feel, and look like for us. Take the time to support those individuals that are taking the time to engage in the craft to get that information out and engage those stories that generally would not make it forward and make it into the mainstream media, the mainstream environment, and other places like that. Support those that tell the truth, that speak truth to power, those individuals that are moving forward and saying, hey, I'm going to say the things that may not want to be heard because it's necessary that those things are said. And then the other part is do what you can from where you are right now. One of the things that I look back, and again, I try to be a good steward of history. And I look back and I see that there have been generations of Black Americans that have contributed to the process of making America a better place for all parties involved. And the thing about it is, those individuals did that at a great personal cost. So when I look back at those individuals and what they endured to do the change and make the change that they made, you got to understand that these individuals, 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, moving on up into this whole process of civil rights and engagements in America, they had to endure personal threats, physical harm. They had to endure the concept of being beat upon, fire hoses, dogs, homes being bombed, churches being bombed. Unfortunately, Medgar Evers being killed in his own driveway at his own home, just trying to get home from work. These individuals have endured a great deal. So I can't get laxed in what I'm doing. I've got to say, hey, get up there and go do the thing that's necessary to be done. Tell the story that needs to be told. Speak the truth that needs to be said. Because a lot of times what ends up happening is that is how, in many cases, those who don't want to see justice prevail, those that want to see a particular type of America that moves forward, that doesn't include everybody, those individuals prevail when we do not do, when we do not engage, when we do not write, when we do not speak, when we do not sing, act, or any other talent that we have been granted. Those individuals win because we have taken the path of least resistance. We have taken the path that says, hey, I can't do anything about it. It's a system that cannot be fixed. I can't do anything about it. And we throw up both hands, we call it a day, right? And that's just not the way to do this, because again, with all the struggle that has been done up to this point to achieve the outcomes that have been reached in America, a lot of people sacrificed and gave of themselves, even to the greatest sacrifice, the sacrifice of their life. How can I then say I can't change the media, I can't change the marketplace that doesn't reflect my children? How can I say that in faith, in light of there are people that grew up without their mother or their father because they decided that they were going to stand up on the side of right and fight for the things that were important? How can I then take a back seat and say, I can't fix this, it's impossible? Those individuals faced an impossible task, but they went at that task every single day. They fought at that task. They pushed at that task. They went after that task with the vigor of anyone possessed for a better future. How can I say I can't move? Right. And that's where, again, it's the charge that we have to carry on. If we want to honor Dr. King, if we want to honor all the people who have come before us, we've got to honor it and be, most importantly, courageous. When I sign off on all of my posts on social media, I always sign it with be courageous. And sometimes people wonder, what is that all about? Folks, sometimes to make things move forward is going to be a scary proposition. You've probably heard before that courage is not the absence of fear, but moving forward in the face of it. You've got to move forward even when you're scared. When I first picked up pen to pad to start writing out this story and getting these things in place, I didn't know where it was going to take me, to be quite frank. But I did know one thing. I wanted something for my children that they could look at and say, I'm there. I wanted it not only for my children, but for other children to say, I'm there. That's me. Chris Withers is me. And I had to take the courage to step out there on faith and believe that as I wrote, it would make that difference. A lot of times you don't know, you must continue to engage even when you do not have the evidence that you will be successful in this endeavor. This is where courage comes in. Anyone can engage and anyone can fight when they're completely healthy and everything is right. It doesn't take courage to do that. It doesn't take strength to do that. What we need to do is we need to move forward even in those times where we're not 100% sure and sometimes when we're a little bit scared. But we recognize that what we have to do is greater than the fear that we feel. We feel the fear, it's real, but we got to move forward in spite of it. Folks, I encourage you, I implore you, this endeavor for social justice, for democracy, please, please be courageous, because we really do need heroic people. Folks, hey, thank you for your time. I'm looking forward to all the questions that you may have for me. That's my time.
Dr. Washington, thank you so much for your very informative and inspiring words, and particularly for your leadership and your example. We're so honored and proud to have you as an alumnus of Excelsior University. And gosh, what a wonderful keynote. Thank you so much for giving us that gift. We have already a couple of questions in the space. So Pam, would you like to bring them up?
Sure. So I'll ask you the first one from Carol McKenzie. How long did it take you to write the book?
Oh, so this is crazy. When I got rolling, like 3 months, done. Like once I got the rhythm together, I was like, oh, we got this, guys. Let's keep going. Yeah, it took 3 months to write. One of the things that most people don't understand is the illustration process takes much longer though. So it took 3 months to write, and it took about 11 months to illustrate to get it in place. The graphic novel is like 108 pages long, and one of the things is the illustrators have to kind of it's this concept of I as the author have a vision of what should be on the page, and then they as an artist has a vision, and we kind of got to make sure that our visions align so that we can kind of pull it together from there. But yeah, 3 months to write, about 11 months in the illustration process.
Awesome. So no blockage, no writer's block happening there.
It happened. I just fought through it. I leaned into it. I'm like, we got to write this, David. You got to get this out. So, like there was a couple of times I was like, and one of the things some people have asked me, like, hey, what's your writing process like? I'm an early riser. I've been that way since the military. So in the morning, in the wee morning hours is the best time for me. I found is the best time to write because you're most creative at that point, and you can kind of get things moving from there. So yeah, that's always been my best one.
That's wonderful. Next question is from Laurie Williams. When it is helpful to use humor, like you did in sharing, never have I ever in rising. When is it? That's the question. When is it helpful to use humor, like you did in sharing your never have I ever in raising awareness about privilege?
So I like to use a lot of humor. And I know I sound very serious today, but one of the things is I find that um, when sometimes when you get people to laugh, you can slide a little truth in there. And when sometimes when in a chuckle, you can while they're laughing, you can just slide a little bit of truth back there. And I found that if you do that, sometimes what ends up happening is it makes it a little lighter for people to engage with, and then it allows them to take a moment to kind of look at it and be like, he is right about that. I never really thought about it that way. And so for me, what I do is I kind of work a position of, I'm gonna give you factuals because again, Excelsior has done a good job in training me on making sure to be a good scholar. And so I make sure to give you the factuals right. But once we got those things kind of in place, then a little bit of humor. It doesn't have to be super serious all the time. You can use humor to tell a truth that sometimes a seriousness won't bring forward. So I'm sorry, was it Lori that asked that question?
Yes.
So Lori, that's kind of how I engage that process. I try to, I'm gonna give you the factuals, but then I'm gonna give you the facts, but then I'm gonna follow that up in some cases with a little bit of humor to kind of lighten the load in this process.
I have another question. What do you consider good representation within a group?
Within a group. So, one of the things I kind of go back to, can you see yourself if you flip through like, okay, guys, we don't have television, just regular TV. Back then it was just regular 3 networks. But anyway, if when you flip through your media space, right, or you're looking at television, can you see at least in a quarter of your position the people that look like you are, in that engagement? And in fact, there was a standard that was placed. UCLA worked on this for Hollywood. They said, "Hey guys, here are the standards by which we kind of put into place diversity and representation. Is there a main character that's of color? Not a supporting character, but a main character of color. Do we have that in your network? How many shows really reflect that? If you have one show out of all the shows that you have on your network, well, you really don't have enough representation that's there. It's not kind of indicative of what the full population might look like. And so that standard that's put into place, in fact, now the Oscars are being judged by this. You'll find it now, television is starting to get judged by this. They're kind of working this idea about, hey, we need to make sure that we have more inclusion. The other thing that sometimes comes about in this process is that we try to diversity stack. That's my term. We diversity stack one character with every identity, so we only have that one character to address to speak for everyone. And that's not a great practice either, because what ends up happening is you're kind of trying to truncate everything into one character, and you're not spreading it out across the ensemble that you have in front of you. And it makes it very difficult for people to see a clear representation of themselves because they're having to kind of feel through so many other things to get to that character.
Thank you. Thank you. I have a question actually about I absolutely agree with you that narrative is important, and listening to everybody's, story is something that really does make you grow and oftentimes will resonate with you because we're all human. We've all been through something, right? Which is the beautiful part about being alive. But today it seems like people sometimes are fatigued with storytelling, are fatigued with just they're going through their own struggles, right? And so I wonder how you continue to open the space up, how you don't allow for people to shut down your narrative, when sometimes you have to balance that narrative with that fatigue that folks are feeling today.
Absolutely. That's why when I wrote, when I write and again, I write the stuffy stuff as well. So like, just research, things like, the regular stuff. Anyway, stuff that pays the bills. All right. So, but on the other side, when I'm writing in this space, one of the things that I'm trying to do when I'm engaging people is I tell them a good story first. The idea is that if I tell you a good story first, and like if I have that in my mind when I set out to start writing, let me tell you a good story. Again, I'm an action buff. I love action films. And folks, let me share something with you. The more B-rated, the better. Okay. All right. Roadhouse. That's where I am. All right. Anyway, so I love action films, right? That's my thing. And so one of the things that I do is when I first started writing Blank Defender, I said, just tell a good action story. Just tell a good
Mm.
action story. Now that you got that good action story in your mind, now do this for me. Tell it with the perspective and the understanding of your experiences for the group so you can share a little bit. Give them a good story. But then as you're giving them that good story, give them the pieces that would make that story, again, more engaging, that would make it a little bit more real, or where you can talk to those things. Because one of the things I tried not to do in the book is I definitely did not want to come off as preachy. That was not what I wanted to do with it. Because again, that just turns you off. People don't want to read it. It's just, it makes for a horrible read. So what I ended up saying was I said, you know what I'm going to do? Let me just tell you a good action story and then watch this. I'm going to, again, maybe a couple laughs, throw it in there, and then it'll start working it forward. And sometimes I think, unfortunately, I've even seen this in the practice of diversity, equity, and inclusion. People are battered when they're talked about when people speak diversity. It's like someone breaks out a club and just starts beating on the participants that are there about the head and feet. And then when it's happening, like, why are they not responding? Well, you're beating them too hard. Like you're making it very difficult for them to pay attention with that bat. So put the bat down, just tell them a narrative, work them through the process, and then what you'll find is that they'll come on in a lot easier. And so that's what I did in the story. Tell a good story first, and then what ends up happening is as you're telling that good story, then you can get to those pieces, because your audience will go with you. They'll be like, oh, he's giving me a good story. I like this story. I like where it's kind of going. And then you can work those pieces in because you've given them the base, you delivered on the promises you've had. And again, not to go too far off into the weeds, Pam, but here's one of the things I've seen, unfortunately, which happens in television. Happens in movies, a couple of different ways. What happens is a story is presented, but the intention is to diversify the story and just throw a bunch of stuff in there. And then what ends up happening is the story is not worked out properly, but they've got a lot of representations, so we got that part covered, but we didn't really work on the story, and the story is not completely together. And the audience who came to be entertained you haven't delivered on the first promise, which was to entertain them. I use the 3E model: educate, encourage, entertain. That was what I did when I was a university professor. I'm going to educate you. I'm going to engage you. I'm also going to entertain you. Why? Because I know that the process will go easier for you if you have all three of those things kind of working together. So in this order, like being in an entertainment capacity, I have to start with entertain you first. But then when I entertain you and engage you, I can then, guess what? I can educate you. And so now that I've got you entertained and you're fully engaged and you're wrapped, awesome. Now here, take this education, would you? Grab that while you're there. You got that? Okay, go ahead. So that's how you
That's
do it.
great. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, so unfortunately, I hate this time of our webinars and keynotes because they have to come to an end. But let me finish with three things. One of them is just the first and last concepts that you brought up, because I think they're really, really powerful in context with everything that you share with us with such inspiration and power. But then after that, I'll ask a quick question that came through the chat just because people are curious. And then David, if it's okay, I'll pass the word to you to close the session. The first one is Dr. King's probably my favorite quote that you brought up in the beginning. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter. And I hope we can take that with us today. And the last concept that you share with us, which I think is incredibly powerful as well, is move forward even when you are scared or when you have no evidence of the success of your endeavor. I cannot think of a more important moment when to do that. So thank you so much. The question that came through is there a sequel? Can we expect a sequel?
Yes, yes. Actually, I have 4 more books to write. I got 4 more of them that have to be written. But here's the thing, gang. So I'll share it with the Excelsior family. So one of the things that we're doing now, which is good, we're working it now. What's going to delay that writing is that we're moving the book into a film. And so that part is going to delay the writing a little bit. I'm going to get back to it, I promise. But right now, it's getting that is getting into that part, making that transition to move it into a film. And so, like right now, we're doing the fundraising, we're going through the process. Because again, what I would like to do, again, try to catch your group where you can. Some people will read a graphic novel, some people will not. Some people will look at a movie and then they'll be like, I'm in. So what we have to do is we got to kind of meet our people where they are. And so that's why I've been getting that from a lot of people like, hey, like that one. When's the next one? I'm like, I'm working on it, folks. I just got to get this movie thing taken care of real quick and I'll be right back. So yeah, that's actually the next endeavor. We're right now, fortunately, we have it on the calendar that in October of 2026, we actually will start filming then. So we're moving this bad boy forward. We're going to make it happen. So pray for me, pull for me, and then again, help and support when we get to that point. But yeah, that'll be the next step.
We're certainly behind you. Well, thank you. And David, would you like to close us?
Sure. So first of all, David, it's unfortunate that we see an alum like you who's so unaccomplished. Actually, in all seriousness, this was terrific, and thank you for continuing to be part of the Excelsior community. I think you're exactly the kind of former student that we hope will continue to be part of our community. Someone who started with Excelsior and then really grew and blossomed in whatever way he or she wanted to do. So thank you for that, and thank you for tonight. This was great.
Y'all are most welcome. And again, like I said in the beginning, it's good to be home, y'all. It's really good to be home with the Excelsior family. It's good to be able to be here, and I just for wherever you are in the Excelsior process, student, alum, faculty, staff. Hey, folks, thank you. I'm so glad we were here together.
Thank you, Dr. Washington. Thank you, David. Thank you, Naila, Pam. Thank you, everyone, for being here and ever upward. Have a wonderful night and happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day.
Good night.